Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today I got a fun, exciting, and extremely unexpected video for you guys this evening because just a few days ago, a user by the name of Hygiene Kodo, believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, uploaded footage directly captured from a Vertexer arcade PCB. If you're wondering to yourself what the hell is Vertexer, that's because this game never technically released. It went to location testing from Taito and just didn't seem to make it. If you've ever played Galactic Storm or any other Taito arcade scalers from that era, you'll understand exactly what this is doing. But this is basically F-Zero from Taito. It is a sprite scaling arcade racing game that has been lost to time for the longest time. So much so that I've been hunting this game for about 10 years now, hoping to buy a PCB to be able to dump it so that it can get included into MAME, and I have had absolutely no leads whatsoever. Apparently I know of one person that has one. They're never going to dump it, but now there is a second game out there. If you take a look at Galactic Storm here, you can 100% see that these two games are definitely connected, both in a visual vibe aspect as well as probably hardware, because no one's 100% sure exactly what the board is that runs Vertexer. It looks extremely close to the 68020 board that runs something like Galactic Storm, but we are not 100% sure. But my guess would be, based upon the release year as well as all of the footage here from both Vertexer as well as Galactic Storm, that they are running on the exact same hardware, probably just with some helper boards to be able to deal with a gigantic moving arcade cabinet that was on location test, which I'll show you in just a moment. But honestly, you know me, you know my channel, I love lost arcade games. I love finding them and trying to release them for everyone to enjoy for free. So hopefully the owner of this board will go ahead and do that as well. But it's one of those things, don't bother them. Sometimes irritating people ends up with the exact opposite result, because getting a ROM dump of Vertexer would be absolutely outstanding. It would make sure that this game stayed alive forever and everyone was able to enjoy it. Because for every arcade game that came out, there's something that was canceled that we know about. Maybe sometimes it gets dumped and is playable by people, maybe sometimes it just ends up staying in a private collection and never seeing the light of day. But this isn't the only game that Hygiene Kodo previewed as well. He also showed Spriggan Powerd, another canceled arcade game that is a shmup that I'll give you some footage of in just a little bit. And just so you know the full entirety of the footage here, I will leave a link to both videos in the description below so you can pop over to Hygiene Kodo's page and check it out for yourself, because I just used snippets of this for the video. But honestly, I am absolutely excited to see this. And it really makes me just want to be able to play Vertexer, because it's one of those games I've always been curious about, and it's one of those things, a lot of times arcade manufacturers will location test cabinets, and if they weren't successful, if they didn't get good feedback, if they didn't make money, they would basically cancel the game. And you'll see here, this is apparently what a Vertexer cabinet looked like back in the day. So I'm sure this was a very expensive game to manufacture, and if arcade operators aren't really showing all that much interest in actually purchasing the cabinets, then Taito would just basically walk away, lose the investment that they put in, versus trying to chase more money after it and ending up losing even more. That is not a very weird story as far as arcades are concerned at all. A lot of the prototype games and unreleased games that I have dumped and released for everyone to enjoy have been exactly that, location test games that did not get good feedback, so developers cancel them, stuff like Akuma, Mortis Immortal. And before we had this video that was recently uploaded, this was the best footage we had of something like Vertexer. Seems like it was from a trade show, and it basically just shows the overall intro sequence, but it seems very dramatic, it seems fun, and it's totally the type of game I want to play, and I think a lot of other people would enjoy playing too, because if you think about it, Taito made some absolutely incredible arcade racing games as well as some sprite scaling games. So if you put those two things together, you have an absolute recipe for something that would just be amazing as far as the concept is concerned. What I always warn people about games that you can't play yet, sometimes you build the hype up in your head, and whatever you imagine that game being as far as the quality is concerned doesn't live up to whatever hype you built up in your own mind. So maybe it's one of those things, maybe Vertexer just sucks, we'll never know until we play it, but hopefully get to play it soon and be able to make that decision for ourselves. Because when I say Taito could make an amazing sprite scaling game and an amazing racing game at the same time, something like Super Chase just shows just how good the developers were back in the day at the sprite scaling, and I just want to see one more sprite scaler out there. And if you're wondering what the game sounds like, we're coming up on the first soundtrack sample, so go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back with more. I mean, if there's one thing Taito was known for, it was sprite scaling. If there's another thing they were known for, it's incredible soundtracks. So you add both of those together and you have a game that I'm just infinitely curious about. And on this board, you also had stuff like Gunbuster, which was a first-person shooter in arcades that used sprite scaling basically to make it seem like it was a full 3D environment. I think something like Wolfenstein 3D, except a little bit earlier and more sprite scaly and less computer-based. Taito was always innovating with its hardware as well as its presentation, so I really do feel like this is probably the era of something like Vertexer, because again, that 68020 board has a lot of similarities to Vertexer, and as far as the look here versus something like Galactic Storm, it just 100% reminds me of that same hardware. But with all of these gigantic cabinets, especially the ones that move, there's going to be a lot of additional boards on them that are going to handle all of the different pneumatics as far as that cabinet is concerned, to be able to understand exactly where to move the cab based upon your controller settings. None of those would be required to run this thing in MAME, so hopefully again at some point in time we can get a ROM dump, because if you had the board in front of you, it would take about all of 10 minutes to pop the chips, dump them, and put them back in, preserving the board as well as the game for all time. But let's take a look at Chase Bombers really quickly, because obviously this doesn't have the same vibe as something like Vertexer, feeling like an arcade racing game in the F-Zero universe. This feels way more like a Mario Kart game with sprite scaling, but it runs on the 68020 hardware as well. Just so you know, some Taito boards have names, some Taito boards just are delineated by what they actually use for hardware. So if you go on System 16 and look up this hardware, it is just the 68020 base, that is its title. Other boards are going to be the Taito Wolf, the Taito Type 0, things such as that. And again, if we go back to that trade show footage, very similar hardware stylings as far as the overall graphical capabilities are concerned. So I feel like if this ROM was found, it would probably take someone from MAME maybe a day or two to get it buttoned up and running in there, outside of the fact that maybe there's some special chip that nobody knows about. So just be aware that even if this thing does get dumped, it might take a little bit to actually run in MAME or another emulator, because we don't really have great photographs of the board, and that's why I'm always trying to find these things so I can purchase them, dump them, and then help share information if I can. It's not every day I get to do it, because honestly finding these things is like a needle in a haystack. You not only need to locate them, but you also need to convince somebody to sell them to you, and both of those things take a very long time. And contrary to popular belief in some of the comments, I am not independently wealthy, so I cannot buy every single thing out there and dump it for you guys. I do need to pick and choose where I actually do stuff like that. But if I was given the opportunity to buy a Vertexer board every day of the week and twice on Sunday, I would drop some stacks on this thing. That way it was preserved for all time. So hopefully that's what ends up happening, because usually more often than not, when suddenly footage online appears of a game that's been lost for a very long time, I'd say maybe 6 out of 10 times that game ends up being preserved and made available to play. And I know I said earlier in the video, it wasn't just Vertexer, it was also Spriggan Powerd that this was talked about as far as footage is concerned. So I want to touch base on that a little bit, because I'm sure a lost Spriggan game will excite a lot of people, just not as much as Vertexer, at least to me. But getting another shmup that could be dumped as well would be outstanding. There's just so many games out there on the arcade side of things that do exist. Maybe there's 5, maybe there's 10 boards in the world, and it just is one of those things that hasn't been dumped and emulated yet. And I am quote unquote guilty of this as well, because that Samurai Showdown 64 location test beta that I have, I've still not finished dumping. I'm always going to do it, even if I have to send it to somebody. I just haven't found the right work partner quite yet. But it's one of those things. There's a lot of stuff out there in a lot of collections, and a lot of times it's only playable by the person that owns it. But if I know you and you live in Chicago, come bring over some beer and pizza, and you can play my Samurai Showdown 64 anytime you want. But honestly, there's a lot of fun out there that I think might be coming soon, and you know full well if there's a lost arcade game I can talk about on the channel, it's something I'm always going to do. Spriggan Powerd looks like a ton of fun, would love to play, but honestly for me, Vertexer really is the game I would love to see. Look at all this insane sprite scaling, all this fun Taito racing, and you put in a soundtrack that I believe was made by Zuntata, but there's not many details out there, and you just have a recipe for a game that could be an all-time classic. Like I said earlier, sometimes with undumped arcade games, when you actually get to play them, they end up controlling like crap and you hate them. We won't be sure until we're able to play the game, but hopefully that's sometime soon, and now you know they're out there. If you have any questions, leave them down below, but I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.